Okay, real quick before I get started, Dad, I just want to mention that I am retiring the Clips channel. Some people have commented saying, hey, you're posting some clips again on this channel. I decided to do that just because after 2 months of posting on the Clips channel, I just wasn't getting any traction and just the growth of this channel just plummeted. And it's also been a hit for me financially as well. And I got mouths to feed. So I decided to post these clips again on the main channel. But I don't push them out to subscribers. So you will only get it when you get a notification. It means there's a new episode out. And you guys know that these conversations are usually about an hour. So if you see a clip that's 30 minutes or less on the channel, then you know it's from the clip. You've already seen it. But if you want to click on it and give it a thumbs up and everything, I'd appreciate it as well. As well as if you guys want to support the show by joining as a member, just $3 a month. And we do a members only episode once a month. Okay, now that's out of the way, Dad. Is Netanyahu dead?
Oh, well, there are rumors to that effect. They're not very strong, so it kind of I don't think so. But it's hard to know in general what's happening in Israel. The military censorship is quite severe, and I imagine he's still there, but he might be hiding in a bunker somewhere. There were rumors that he had flown off to Germany, and then those were later denied. Who knows what's going on? There's a lot of fog of war here. There are a lot of things in general that we don't know what's going on. On the Iranian side, there are rumors circulating that the head of the Quds force, a very, very high-ranking member of the Islamic Republic, the Quds force is actually the part of the IRGC that is responsible for basically special operations and counterintelligence. And it was formerly headed by Soleimani. Soleimani, of course, was assassinated by Trump during his first term. And his replacement was a man named Qani, Qaani, Qani. And then this actually didn't start just immediately. This actually, rumors about this man began to circulate a couple years ago, actually after the assassination of Nasrallah in Lebanon. Because it was noted that he was supposed to be at that meeting, but he didn't show up. And then, of course, everybody else at that meeting, including Nasrallah. And I know there was at least one, I think a couple of IRGC generals were killed there in Beirut. So people began to say, well, wait a second, could this guy be a mole? And recently it's been noted that he hasn't made an appearance in public, for a while. There was a recent Quds Day, actually, which celebrates Iran's support for the Palestinians, for the Palestinian resistance. It took place just, even in these wartime conditions. And a lot of people came out, including much of the leadership, were actually out there on the streets. But there was this Qani didn't show his face. And so they're thinking, there are rumors, it may just be rumors. Or it could be deliberate misinformation by the Israelis. That's possible too. The rumor is that he got that the same thing happened at this most recent, the meeting that where Khamenei and so much of his family and others were killed. That he was supposed to be there, he didn't show up, and it just. And they grabbed him. They just said, okay, yeah, this guy is the mole. He's the one that's been leaking the information. That's the rumor. Now, the Iranians haven't, I think, are denying that, maybe not particularly strongly, but they're denying that. There's an official denial. But you see it, on YouTube, on social media. It's out there. And it's very interesting. Now, some people are asking, a legitimate question: how could somebody like a mole be that high and not be caught and actually be, leaking damaging information over a period of years? And I say, well, we do have a historical precedent, and it's actually in China during the civil war between the communists and the Kuomintang, the nationalists. There was the Chinese had a mole at the very top of the Defense Department, a very senior advisor, the deputy defense minister, something like that. He was involved in all the strategic planning and just knew every military move that was going to make. And he was leaking this information again and again to the communists. So the communists knew exactly what the nationalists were going to do, and so he was really instrumental to the defeat of the nationalists during the Civil War. But why wasn't he grabbed? There were people who suspected him. Actually, for quite a while, and their suspicions grew. But he was a favorite of Chiang Kai-shek's. And so people were very reluctant to arrest him or anything because they feared that would anger the Generalissimo, Chiang Kai-shek. So that was one reason they just were hesitant to go after him. But eventually they caught him red-handed, and he was arrested and he was executed in Taiwan. Now, there's at least a rumor, I don't know if there's any support of this, but that Khamenei, liked this man, Khani, and he, in a sense, that way protected him. As it seems to me like, if this is true, and again, we don't know if it is, it would be a very, very similar kind of situation where you have a high-level mole that has, is personally liked by the supreme leader.
And why would Iran cover this up? Is it because it's too embarrassing? They think it would affect morale too much, that like, they have moles in our top leadership. This looks really bad. So they're denying it. Is that?
I think that's a possibility. I think it would be, they fear it would be a blow to morale because it is the head of the Quds. That's supposed to be like kind of the ideological core of the Islamic Republic. And you have something like that, that is a real stain. It would alarm a lot of people, and a lot of people just say, well, these people are rock solid. If nobody is, if they're not solid, then nobody is solid, or you got to suspect everybody. So there may be a real reason for denying it, if indeed it's true. But the other possibility is maybe Khani is actually a great and very effective leader, and the Israelis are spreading this misinformation, or it's just people speculating on the internet. All these things are possible. But anyway, just throw that out there. We have these talks about Netanyahu and talk about Khani. There's a lot of fog of war here, and some of these things, we may never know the answer to, or we may not know until the dust settles and this war ends.
Yeah, with the Netanyahu one, I just find it's odd that we've only had 2 videos, and the internet has been ablaze saying that these are AI, that Netanyahu's had 6 fingers or something wrong with the coffee cup in the last one, or this was from 2024. I don't know. I can't say. I don't know what it is, but something doesn't feel right. Something doesn't seem right here. So if he is dead, what does that mean for Israel in the war? I mean, we talked about this Khani guy, how he was a tower figure in Quds. I feel like Netanyahu, that is Israel. They lose him, I imagine there would be panic. Nobody can really replace someone like Netanyahu in Israel.
Well, again, there are a lot of people, at probably close to half the population that just detests Netanyahu. They really hate him. Yet, when he goes to war, they back him. Again, I see that reading Haaretz. They're all, and I think they have come to see him as, a reliable, in their minds, a reliable defender of Israel, at least on the military battlefields. That's the way to look at it. So it would be a blow to morale, I think, in general. And then maybe, but then also there's Israel is a very fractious place. There are a lot of the government that now the current administration is. Just a number of very, dissimilar factions that are cobbled together. We have, for example, the ultra-Orthodox who refuse to serve in the military. And much of the rest of the country is furious about that. And, including other people even within Netanyahu's coalition. Because Netanyahu himself is secular. Many of the people in his coalition are secular, but they need these ultra-Orthodox to have a minority. And he somehow has managed, you have to admire his political skills. He's managed to hold this coalition together. And he's done it again and again. As often it looks like it's about to break apart, and he pulls some sort of trick out of his hat, like launching a new war or something, and he holds it together. So if we did lose, if we have lost Netanyahu, that would, I think it would means some sort of political chaos in Israel. It's not clear who could put together a new coalition. It's very, very hard to see.
Do you think that that would lead to just sort of the splintering of Israeli society? I mean, and potentially just the Zionist project in a whole. I mean, they're getting hit
Yeah,
hard. I've seen
yeah,
videos of people panicking on the streets. I just don't know how much
right,
longer you could hold
right.
together. And if Netanyahu's not there, who knows?
Yeah, well, I think it would be a blow to morale. But the thing is, like they disagree very passionately on the Israelis do very passionately on many issues. But when it comes to fighting Iran or fighting Hezbollah or taking a chunk of Syrian territory, they seem to be they all stand together. So I don't know how much it would affect the war effort. I don't know. Just down the road, it's going to have effects as, once the war is over. I think it'll have tremendous impact. Again, I don't know what's happened to him, but it is true. It seems like in past wars, he was always there on TV, and you can't keep the guy away from the cameras and the microphones, right? And yeah, he's just sort of he's disappeared. It does make you wonder. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't know how much longer Israeli society would be able to hold together. You said that they're always for war with Iran, but I'd like to see that poll taken now after being subjected to this amount of damage. I mean, do we have an idea of the state of damage, or are you just saying that the
Yeah,
censorship is just so severe we
right,
can't really say anything
right.
definitively?
Yeah, I was just thinking about there's quite a bit of fog of war, and there's quite a few unanswered questions. And one of the big questions is, how much damage has been done to Israel? Now, the Israeli papers are claiming, like, especially Haaretz, which you would think would be the most critical and the most willing to report on the negative side of the war. They claim that there has been significantly less damage to Israeli infrastructure this time than during the 12-day war. But they say it's actually been worse as far as, air raid sirens. People are constantly, the sirens go off every day, in the middle of the night, and people just aren't getting sleep. They're not, they're missing work. The kids aren't going to school. All the kids are staying home right now. And that's, that's having an effect. It's wearing on people, and Israelis are complaining about that. But then the hardcore hawks are ridiculing those who complain about it. But it is something. We're only a little over 2 weeks into this war, and if this could go on for months, we'll see what kind of effect it has. So I don't know. It's just like I've seen pictures of damage, but it's true I haven't seen pictures of the kind of damage that I saw during the 12-day war. I remember to the research center. Now we just don't know. One thing is, like, during that war, the damage that was done to military facilities in Israel was completely unreported, or we didn't see any images until after the war because of the strict military censorship. So we don't know if Iranian missiles are hitting military targets. I know, like the other day, I think I saw they hit the airbase in the Negev. But to the extent of the damage, we just don't know. So that's a big open question. It really is. Now we know that Israel and the United States are doing a great deal of damage to Iran. But what kind of damage? We know that they attacked police stations. They even attacked a park that was called Police Park, which made people wonder, is this AI? They just said, go look for police places. And so they actually bombed Police Park along with all the police stations in Tehran. We know that a great deal of damage has been done to residential buildings and civilian infrastructure in general in northern Tehran. And northern Tehran, Tehran is, first of all, probably the most liberal city in Iran. And northern Tehran is the most liberal part of that liberal city, where you have the most anti-government people of an anti-government persuasion there. And that's being hit the hardest, which is seems like, not particularly wise if you're actually trying to create an opposition, which I don't think you can do anyway. But we've had actually, direct comments from the people there. It's just like, look, I hated the Islamic Republic, but you can't do this. You're killing our people, and I'm standing, against you. I'm standing with all my fellow Iranians. So, if they're destroying a lot of civilian infrastructure, that's terrible for the Iranians, but it doesn't help the Israeli and American war effort. Quite the reverse. Now, they must also be hitting military targets, hitting military bases, and going after, missiles, missile production facilities. But we just don't know how many of those are actually on the surface, because, we've been told that they have, and we've seen the videos, I'm sure, of these underground missile cities. So it's just like, if you're blowing up stuff on the surface, you're not really doing anything. This is a big question. Then they say that they got a lot of launchers. It was a week ago, I think the Israelis were claiming that they had destroyed 75% of the Iranian launchers. Now, just yesterday, the Israeli media reported that yesterday, Sunday, was they had the third largest barrage of the war. I think the first 2 days were the largest, but then this was the third. That indicates that that information that the IDF was putting out about destroying almost all the launchers was false. And I have trouble believing it. But again, it's an open question. I think that they probably have hidden away. Again, it's a big country. They have a lot of places to hide all kinds of military assets, and they're not going to put all of it out there in the western part of the country and up on the surface. So when you're talking about 75%, it's about just 75% of what they know. But, again, we're guessing, and that's all we can do at this point. And then there's that whole issue of air defense. You have at one extreme, you have Ted Postal, who says, even when it's working well, they're only getting 5 or 10%, of the incoming missiles. And then the Israelis are claiming that it's they're getting 90%. I know.
Well,
I know.
We know we can't trust them. So
yeah, I know. But the UAE claimed 93%. The thing is, I think Ted Postal is probably right. I don't know if it's that 5 or 10% is true for every kind of missile or something. I suspect it's overall it may be a little bit better. At least it was better at the beginning of the war. It's somewhere in between. I think. Maybe Ted Postal's completely right about this, but I'm not sure. Again, he's the expert, but he's also limited with the data that he can work with, and he just gets a certain amount of videos, and maybe those are skewed in one direction. Who knows? But it's a big question, because if air defense actually has some value, let's say it shoots down a third of the missiles or something, or even a half, we'll give them a half just for argument's sake. Well, when they lose that, they have lost a lot. And there's going to be a real increase in hits on Israel. And we have every reason to believe, and this is what we're getting reports to this effect, that the Israelis are running out. Again, remember, they were running out at the end of the 12-day war. We're past 12 days now. And this is not a surprise to us. And if, in fact, the air defense is really worth something, and, it may not be worth much against hypersonic missiles, but it's worth something against certain kinds of missiles and slower moving missiles and whatever. Then they're going to be that much more vulnerable. And it may be just that the Iranians, as many say, and so far it seems to be true to me, that they've made a decision from the start. We're going to make this a war of attrition. They want to have a quick war. Okay, but they're not going to get it. The Americans and the Israelis want a quick war, in and out. They're not going to get it. We're going to make this a war of attrition, and they'll just keep on pounding and keep on pounding them and keep on pounding them. Maybe the damage to Israel is not that significant so far. We can't be sure. But we do know that the damage to the bases, the military bases in the Persian Gulf and in Iraq and in Saudi Arabia, is very extensive. There's more, very, very, the American military infrastructure has been severely damaged in the region with real consequences.
Yeah. Another thing that I think might happen is that the West Bank is going to explode very soon. I think we might see something explode. I mean, already with Lebanon, the IDF going in there. Who knows what will happen with Egypt and Jordan? But I don't know if you've been seeing some of these videos. These Israeli settlers, I think they're taking out their revenge just on the Palestinian people, just taking it to another level. We've seen what they've been doing to the Palestinians in the West Bank for decades, and it's been
Mhm.
intensified after Gaza. But now I saw a video last night of Israeli settler just poured gasoline over somebody and just lit them on fire in Ramallah, just right in. And there's the horrible story where these Israeli settlers opened fire on a car, killed a family, like the parents and the kids. Only one kid survived, and they just
Yeah,
make fun of him. It's unbelievably evil. You
right.
see these things, you're like, these people need to be stopped. We have to stop these people. They're completely out of control, and it's and if you just start lighting people on fire in the streets and gunning people down like this, there's going to be some type of new intifada, right? A new uprising that I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. And I'm just wondering, is there a way that these Palestinians can get armed at some point? I mean, that's the
Yeah.
problem, is that the settlers and the IDF, we've been in the West Bank. We know what it's like,
Mhm.
how they just roll through and they can act with impunity because they have all the guns. But
Right.
if these Palestinians are able to get some weapons at some point, and even if they don't, I mean, they may be able to overrun a little base at some point and take some IDF weapons or something. I just feel like you can push the people only so far before they just going to start. I mean, we've already seen it happen before. That's what these intifadas have been. So,
Yeah.
what do you see happening in the
Yeah.
West Bank? And
Well, it's possible. I mean, it's become increasingly difficult for the people on the West Bank because the Israelis have been taking more and more territory, and and just dividing up the territory that remains. With these checkpoints and fences and whatever, so that what you have is just rather than uh, a unified West Bank the way it was in 1967. One contiguous territory. It's 100 parcels of land, and it's hard to go from one to the other. It's not impossible. They showed, like, I think it was last year or maybe the previous year, that there was kind of something of an insurrection in the what is the name? Is it Jeddah? It's not Jeddah. I forget the name of there's a Palestinian refugee camp in the northern part of the West Bank, and there was quite a bit of fighting there. In the end, it was just looked like Gaza, unfortunately. I mean, they did have some weapons, but they were just overpowered. So I don't know what they can do. That's unfortunate. But it is very important to remember, like you say, these awful things happen just constantly. And they've always happened, but it used to be maybe they happen once a month or once a week, just real horrifying stories of cruelty, of sadism by the settlers and with the support of the IDF. But now they're all happening almost every day, and they seem to be even worse. You mentioned those two stories, and then I think I saw another one just last night of a man. He was trying to protect his two sons. Well, because one of his sons got shot, he was trying to take care of him, and then they shot the other one. These are his boys. And then it's happening too in Gaza. Let's not forget, there's a starvation siege again in place on Gaza. They're still killing people there every day. We don't even talk about it. It's just like, okay, yeah, they placed a starvation siege. The world doesn't even notice because they've gone off and, launched this attack on Iran. And then in Lebanon, they're launching gearing up for a full-scale invasion. They've already, begun that invasion, and they're bombing many targets. They've killed well over 600. I think it's close to 700 Lebanese. And just to give it, again, the kind of the horror of you give the numbers, but then just, think about what it means. We're talking about entire families that are being wiped out. One case, there was a refugee family. They had fled like southern Beirut because of the bombing there, and to a beach, and were living in a tent on the beach, as refugees. And then that got bombed, and all 8 members of the family in the tent were killed. This is what's happening just all the time. And it's because, again, like I know I've made this point several times before. if we just kind of wound the clock back and it was and nothing happened in Gaza, nothing new in Lebanon, but we had the sort of things happening in the West Bank that are happening every day, there would be a lot of talk about the West Bank. It's like, what are the Israelis doing? They're really losing control. This is, there would be protests, protests wouldn't amount to anything, but the European governments would say, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. But we don't even notice it because it's just like the violence has spread so far that these things that would normally attract attention no longer attract any kind of attention.
Has there been any other parallel in history where we've seen an army act with such barbarity for so long against the people? Like, just no regard for human life. You hear about these atrocities, but here it's just every day, year after year. And it just, and in the United States, we just started off as well, just full. And I think part of it might be the AI. They just take the human out of it. It's like, okay, right. Yeah, that girl's school gets bombed. And we killed 168 little girls on day one of this war. Yeah. It's just the war crimes and just the rhetoric from Pete Hegseth and no mercy, no quarter. It's like, he thinks he's like in Pirates of the Caribbean or something.
Yeah. Right. No, I don't think it's, certainly when you talk about the rhetoric and the open disregard, for any kind of conventions of war, rules of engagement. And in fact, he's openly rejected that. That's all woke stuff. That's just, we're the Department of War. We don't do this. We punch them when they're down. He's using all this kind of language. That's new. That's just, we haven't seen anything like that. I don't think really in the history of this country. Maybe you have to go back to Sherman in the Civil War or something, but I doubt that he even spoke like that. He was very cruel in the way he treated civilians in the South, but he wasn't. He was still still a cultured man.
Yeah, it's just shocking to me that we don't even try to pretend to be the good guy anymore. It's just
well, I think it's what's come to it. There's this psychology. It's like, because we're the good guys, we get to do whatever we want, and putting any kind of any sort of restraints on the good guys is foolish. That's political correctness or anything. The good guys should just go all out. And because of the good guys, that whatever they do justifies, because their ends are always just and right, and the ends always justify the means. I mean, I think that's the thinking. But it certainly doesn't look like we're the good guys, when you actually analyze it. You just have to, there's this deep-seated assumption, and it's not just the U.S., but it's, the collective West, of this sort of moral supremacy. And you see it in, relation to Russia. Again, there's always this double standard. We can do what we want because we're the good guys. We're the empire of good. And if you try to resist us, that's proof that you're bad,
Have you been following what's been going on with Tucker Carlson and this, basically an attempt to arrest him is what I'm hearing, that they...
I don't know much about that. I think I just saw a headline this morning about that. So you might know more about that than I do.
I don't know much about it, but he's just saying, like the CIA is taxed, and you can just see online all these Zionist accounts calling for, saying that he's a traitor. He talked to the Iranians before the war. Okay, well, I thought also we said this wasn't a war. This is, this illegal war. And you see this effort, and you see people like Laura Loomer calling and saying that if you know people that support Iran, to report them to the FBI, to the CIA, we need to bring back this McCarthyism. There's all these traitors amongst our midst. And this is Laura Loomer. I don't know who the hell this person is, but it seems like she somehow has the ear of Donald Trump. And you see Trump as well making these statements, going after the media, people that are saying anything negative stories about how the war is going in Iran. And you just wonder how authoritarian are we going to get? Are we going to see people like Tucker Carlson get arrested before anybody in the Epstein files does? What? This is if they go after him like this, and if they do try to do something like actually bring charges and put him in jail, they're going to make a lot more Tucker Carlsons. I think it's going to backfire immensely.
Right.
But this is where I'm worried we're coming from. Just like us having these conversations, are we now an enemy of the state because we don't approve of Trump's insane war?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that Trump actually stated that, the people that were spreading news that he disapproved of, which he called fake news, is suggesting that the war wasn't going very well and that the Iranians were having some successes. He flew into a rage over that. And on Truth Social, he condemned it, suggested it was AI, all this information that didn't really, let's say, comport with his own narrative. And I believe, right, I don't know if he did on True Social or elsewhere, but he actually suggested that, again, these people were traitors and that they, maybe should be subjected to the death penalty. I think he threw that out there at one point. He is, Trump is really losing it. And I think he's losing it in particular over the Strait of Hormuz. This is something that he didn't see coming, which is stupid because, again, we saw it coming, right? I didn't think it was going to happen as fast as it did, but we've always discussed the possibility of that. And anybody who looked at the map, would say, hey, wait a second here.
Or just listen to the Iranians. They said, they told us what they're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. They did exactly. Well, that's the same thing we don't listen to what the other side says. And it's the same thing with Russia. It would really it would be very helpful if our media made a point of actually reporting on that. This is what the Iranians are saying. This is what the Russians are saying, but they don't. Maybe they're starting to more, actually. They're finding that IRGC makes a lot more sense than Trump does. But anyway, yeah, he is losing it over the Strait of Hormuz. It obviously is, I think, has him in a panic. So we've got these crazy statements. First of all, it was on at least 2 occasions, he urged the ship captains to just make a run for it, be brave and go for it when his own Navy won't go in there, which is just, again, as we mentioned last time, that's just beyond bizarre. But now he's, made this call for other nations to come and help, again, when his own Navy won't go in there.
Including China. He's asking China.
Yeah, I know. It's just like, he's really losing it. I mean, there's China, Japan, South Korea, France, the UK, and every single one of them, except for China, every single one of them just made an announcement, we're not doing this. China did not even dignify his request with a response. It's like, we're not even talking to this guy about this. So it shows that, he is scared. And then he did that attack on Kharg Island, and he threatened, he said, out of a decency, I didn't, attack the oil facilities, which apparently is true because satellite photos show that there are Iranian ships leaving the island, which again, I think is amazing. And we haven't had a real explanation for that because we know like what happened in Venezuela. Why is the U.S. Navy letting these go through? And I think it has to be China in some ways. Like China said, if you grab those ships, we're going to do, X, Y, and Z. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. And so which is quite interesting. But he said that if after he bombed Kharg Island, he said that there were 90 strikes. The Iranians say there were 15. He said, out of decency, I didn't go after the oil infrastructure. But if they continue to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, then I'll go after it. And then later he said that he had, in fact, obliterated the island. He just doesn't, he's contradicting himself constantly. I think it was in an interview with NBC. But he might do it again for fun. I mean, what the hell? I'm sorry, but is that a way a president talks during war? This is really, it's just beyond crazy. But then, as I know we mentioned last time, there's the reports that Marines are being transferred into the area. And then also I saw that an amphibious assault group is leaving the South China Sea and is heading towards the Middle East. So he may really try to go for Kharg Island. Now, stop and think about that. First of all, it would be very difficult. Like you can't even get a ship in there. How are you going to do an amphibious assault? Right? It's going to be hard. Maybe you could do it from the air, but those are hard, and if I'm sure that they still have, some military capabilities on the island, and the island is so close to the shore that they can easily fire using artillery and everything else. Anybody that is on that island is within easy range of the Iranians on the mainland. But let's just, for argument's sake, that somehow, the Americans managed to seize that island. What does it do for the U.S.? I mean, it's in the Persian Gulf, and you still can't get ships out of there. So, okay, you've deprived the Iranians of oil, but the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. And if you couldn't, to be honest, if you can't seize the tankers that are going to China, is China going to be happy about you shutting down the whole oil facility? I think his idea is that we're going to take it over and then we're going to start pumping the oil. I think that's the way Trump thinks, right? I mean, it really is. That's what makes me kind of worried. But he's assuming that the Iranians will kind of cooperate with that. They're not going to. If he actually tries to seize the oil, it's not like, the oil's actually being pumped out of the ground there. It's coming from the mainland and then being piped over there. So they can shut it off from the mainland. If you try to take it over, it's not like you don't actually have control over the oil. And so I don't know what he's thinking of doing, but he's just been so reckless. And, in so many ways, he's gotten away with a lot of these things because he'll do something, he'll shoot from the hip, he'll do something impulsively, like slap 100% tariffs on China. And then, because, okay, a tariff war is something different. You can just remove the tariffs and it's over, right? He's got himself into a real fix here. He's obviously gone into this impulsively without thinking it through. And he's like he's in quicksand and he's just sinking.
So you really think that they might try to do an amphibious landing or a paratroop onto Kharg Island and take over that island? I mean, it sounds like a bad movie script.
Yeah.
That wouldn't get approved for the Expendables 3 or whatever. It's like, this doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, but it sounds, I'm sure he'll get huge pushback from the military. But again, like he got pushback from this, as we've been told, from this whole attack, this war that he's launched against Iran. There were quite a few people telling him, it's come out, I think, more and more information that J.D. Vance, the vice president, was advising against it. And he's been pushed aside, unfortunately. So people have told him, this is not a good idea, but he went ahead and did it. And I'm sure that the military would say, this is a very, very bad idea, Mr. President. But he seems like he's surrounding himself with yes men. He's pushed J.D. Vance and, other people that were questioning the wisdom of his ideas, pushed them away. And according to Axios, he's surrounded himself with sycophants that are cheering him on and say, yo, you're just incredible. Don't listen to those naysayers. You just got to double down and just show how tough you are. And again, it's like the appeal of some sort of dramatic special operation, the airborne troops, parachuting into the island and seizing it, and he's got the oil. I think that really appeals to his imagination. And he probably, I don't know that he'll do it, but I bet he's toying with it, and it could happen.
It's insane. I mean, even if you do get these boys on an island, then what?
Yeah.
How are you going to supply them?
That's another point. Yeah.
It's just, you're shooting fish in a barrel. You just dump them on an island, on a Persian island. It's not right. And your ships can't get close. From what I've heard, do you know the status of the USS Abraham Lincoln?
Well, I've heard that actually it's more than heard. It's like Chinese satellite images show that it is pulled back. Previously, it was closer, like 300 to 400 kilometers, and it's now back 1,000 kilometers, which suggests that either the Iranians did, maybe manage to hit it, or at least to give it a good scare, and so they're well out of range, and that increases difficulties for the U.S. military as well. It's just that it makes every flight, into Iran, or at least, like into Iraq, Iraqi airspace, because I think that's what most of them are doing. That much longer, and it makes air refueling necessary. And again, we've seen the consequence of that. We've had at least one tanker go down and at least some damaged. Of course, those the ones that were damaged were on the ground. The other one was in the air. The one that was apparently in a collision, lost the top of its tail. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
I think
wonder.
we're going to see more of those kind of things, right?
Yeah, just to speak about the air refueling. So there were 5 that were destroyed at what Prince
Yeah.
Edward Sultan Air
Well, according to
Base.
the Wall Street Journal, they didn't say destroyed, but they suffered varying degrees of damage. They said that they were reparable, but who knows? That could be repairs could be anywhere from days to months. So we don't know.
Right, and the one I know there's a lot of debates. People are so sure that KC-135 was shot down by the Iraqi resistance. We don't know, but I will just say what the Chinese have said. The consensus from Chinese military analysts is that what you can see on the KC-135 that did return with the tail top shorn off, that was a variant of the KC-135, KC-135 RT, which has a refueling receptacle at the front. This is a special KC-135 that is designed to actually be allowed to be refueled by another refueling tank. So the theory is that the distances have become so long because Iran has wiped out so many of the bases that to carry out these sorties, they have to be refueled multiple times. And now even these stratotankers need to be refueled by another stratotanker. So that's what this one was. And the idea is that this is a complex night maneuver that they were doing where another stratotanker was coming down to refuel the one below it. And there was something that went wrong and they hit it and one of them blew up and the other one had the tail shorn off.
Yeah.
So that's what the Chinese are saying. It sounds plausible, but we don't know. But I know some people just say definitively it was shot down. I think there is a plausible case to be made that there was some type of collision. The Chinese are also just saying that these types of flights, they're trying to keep this tempo up, and they're having to fly further and further distances, and then the maintenance required to keep up on these planes starts to really wear down, and they can't keep up with it. Crews get tired, accidents are going to happen, and a stratotanker refueling another stratotanker isn't a typical maneuver. This is rarer. That's why there's very few of these variants. And so I think this wasn't something that was carried out that often and doing in the middle of the night, crews tired. So that's their explanation.
Yeah. I'll just add, there's one other explanation that's put out there that I found interesting. It takes a little bit of both sides, collision and shoot down. It's just that actually one of the tankers was shot at and was trying to evade a missile when the collision occurred, which is believable. That's another possibility.
Yeah, but, maybe it was during the refueling process and they saw it and then, they had to disconnect and it caused something,
Right. Okay. Yeah. So in a part of the fog of war, but it's clear, that there are real strains on the American military machine. And you can see it again. The aircraft carrier has been moved 1,000 kilometers from the Iranian coast. You can see the fact that, again, these bases are being hit. Those tankers were in Saudi Arabia. That's actually one of the farther bases, and they were hit. They were damaged. And all of this has got to be, having a huge impact on logistics, on refueling and everything that makes these continued assaults possible. I heard that, I think like the Romanian air base was now being put into use for the operation. That's a long ways away. That's right. That tells you something, it's just like they've been forced out of the region, right? It's no longer, they had it. It was so easy. Oh, we have these bases. Oh, we have Iran surrounded, right? And we've actually made, I think it's fair to say the point before that which is a point that other people made, I guess I'm sort of just repeating their analysis, is that these bases, in the event of a real war, immediately become targets. They're not really assets. They quickly turn into liabilities, and that's what we're seeing. They've become these tremendous liabilities, and the U.S. is having to abandon them, and at great cost.
Yeah, Iran, they took out these radars to poke the eyes out of the U.S., and now our ability to project power, we can see it's been incredibly hampered. Like you say, I don't think we can sustain this tempo for that much longer. And I think that's why they're targeting these 135 stratotankers, because they understand that really the only way for the U.S. to continue to carry out strikes on their country is with these refueling tankers, and they're having to go further and further distances. And I don't know how many of these we have, but if we've already taken out, 5 that were damaged, 1 that went down, 1 that had the tails torn off. So we're talking about 7 straddle tankers that have already been removed. I think that this in itself is having a massive impact. And like you're saying, they're flying from Romania, just how exhausting it is for them to just fly over and over again and just refuel midair multiple times to get to their target. And the USS Abraham Lincoln, like I said, 1,000 kilometers off. The USS Gerald Ford, everybody on that aircraft carrier is pissed. They've been moved from the Middle East to Venezuela, back here. They haven't been able to go home and see their families forever. Right. I hear people on these that are remaining on these bases are incredibly pissed off, and they're upset. They don't want to die for Israel. And I think this is just the sentiment amongst so many of our troops, because before they never had an opportunity. They never fought an adversary that can shoot back at them like this. And I think they're realizing, like, well, now that we can get hit, they start to think about this war a bit more. Like, this is a war of choice. I don't want to do this. Why?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. About the bases and the military personnel there was several reports I saw last night that I think it was a PX was hit at a military base right outside the Baghdad International Airport, a U.S. military base, and that there were multiple casualties. There was a mass casualty incident, and we have got no it's a store for military personnel. Okay. So he's right there on the base. It's like where you go buy some snacks or something, and it was hit. Again, these bases are being hit hard, not just by the Iranians, but by Iran-aligned militias, within places like Iraq. They've been doing quite a bit of damage. They have really taking a very active role, and the U.S. has been striking them, even though, including, many of their units are actually a part of the regular Iraqi army. It's interesting. You don't hear much from Iraq. It's just like Iraq has been a captive of the U.S., and so that's why the U.S., they have their bases there and they've been using their airspace, but the majority of people there want the U.S. to go. And, I think the incoming government definitely does. So one thing that happens when this is all over, I think the U.S. are definitely out of Iraq, and they may be out of all the Persian Gulf states too. It's just that's, I think, what Iran wants to see. And if they see that, I think they may say, okay, mission accomplished. We got the U.S. out of the region.
But then what happens to Israel?
Yeah, well, that's obviously a huge blow to Israel. That's.
Will it exist? I mean, that's kind of I don't know.
Yeah,
what is its relationship with the U.S. be now?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to continue for a while. We've talked about all the ways in which that relationship is being eroded. And again, it's a majority of U.S. citizens are more sympathetic with the Palestinians now than they are with the Israelis. But when you go into Congress and whatever, they don't see any of that. I mean, it's just like the establishment is still firmly Zionist. I don't think that can last forever, and it may not last for very long, but at present time, that's still the reality. So we're not going to see, a sudden cutoff in support for Israel. But we may see the beginnings of that, or maybe we're seeing the beginnings of that already. I still think we have a ways to go.
I mean, if Israel's just completely destroyed, I mean...
Yeah, well, again, we don't know the damage that's being done, but I don't think we're any close to that. But the thing is, I think they were hoping this would be very quick. Again, Israel and the U.S. was hoping that maybe they could get regime change immediately. They decapitated the leadership. Maybe, there were these reports that they had like connections with, deep within the government. So if this Connie story is true, he could have been the guy that they really had. He was there to carry out some sort of coup or something. But the problem is, it may be when the Ayatollah was killed, which again was just so stupid because again he's the main obstacle to the development of a nuclear bomb. He's really been I think a moderating force in so many ways. I think he's really an idealist, and he maybe it's often true of idealists. He's not of a suspicious nature, so he protected this guy. He thought, oh, he's an okay guy. He couldn't possibly do that. But when they took him out, he lost his protection. So it's not only that they removed the main obstacle to the bomb, but they also, if this Connie story is true, they also, as a consequence, lost their main mole, and so they failed to achieve this regime change. But they always knew that it might not succeed, and what I'm hearing, like from Axios and other sources, is that there was like they were prepared to say, okay, maybe we won't have immediate success, but we're set up, if necessary, we can fight for 4 to 6 weeks. I think it's 4 to 6 weeks with gradually decreasing intensity, because they just can't keep up the intensity that they had in the first couple of weeks for that period of time. But they thought 4 to 6 weeks. But now there's this growing awareness and sort of a panic is beginning to set in both Israel and the U.S. that this could go on for months and months. Someone said, maybe September. Now, if you say September, like that's getting to the end of Japan's oil reserves. That's, which is...
Yeah, the U.S. is so stuck. We're so stuck. Trump just walked into the most obvious trap possible, and he has no way of extricating it. He's in this mindset now, which is so terrifying that I guess the only way forward through this is forward. I don't know if he can pull out, and that's why we're talking about dropping, troops onto Kharg Island potentially. To even discussing this is just absolutely insane. The global economy is just going to. I mean, we're looking at, if this goes on much longer, we're talking about like a global depression. Like this is going to the amount of there's going to be massive economic damage. I mean, I think there will be food shortages as well. And everybody's going to be turning on the U.S. And as this starts to get worse, like if we do drop troops on Kharg Island and they get chewed up, and then I think what we're going to see is looking for a scapegoat. This war is not going right. Where is it going to go? And I just think that maybe what I'm hoping for is that at some point, Trump just doesn't have a filter. The truth comes out every now and then, and he'll just say, "Yeah, it was Netanyahu, it was Israel that was behind a lot of this." And start to shift the blame onto them, because that is where a lot of the blame should be. I mean, obviously he's the president. He should be able to say no to this when a bad idea is presented to him. But so he bears. I'm not absolving him of any responsibility. But I think we may start to see even the establishment here begin to kind of shift and slightly kind of put the blame on Israel, because they have to have some scapegoat. Where else can they put the blame?
Yeah, well, that's a possibility. I don't know if the establishment will do it, but, maybe they will if things get really bad. You start to, the rats on the sinking ship, they start pointing at each other, and it could happen. Yeah, it certainly could happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that the U.S. can do at this point, right? This is it. This is the end. I mean, the only thing that maybe we could do is if we just admit to Iran's demands, pull out all of our bases and say we're done, give some guarantees we'll never attack them again. I mean, but we can't, and pay them reparations for all the damage we've done. It's impossible. There's no way that Trump can do it, especially with someone like Trump,
Right.
So,
well, I think it's impossible. I mean, there's just no way. You can only make a country pay reparations if you actually truly defeat them, not just with, it's not just that they failed to defeat you, but you truly have to defeat them, and, and you can actually threaten their homeland or something, or occupy their home. That's, obviously that's not going to happen. But the thing about the bases could happen. It may not be so much that the Americans agree, okay, but actually those countries start to say, hey, make their own deals with Iran, and say, hey, they see that, Iran has already provided a list of friendly countries whose tankers can pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and China and Russia, and other ships as well, not just oil tankers. Pakistan is one example. India, they've decided, even though they had some reasons to be very, very, disappointed with India, but they still, I think, wisely are maintaining that relationship. And India is in a really tough spot. Again, they have tremendous need for oil. They have to import, the lion's share of their oil. And they have, unlike China and Japan and many of these other countries, they only had reserves for something like 15 days. So they have an immediate need. Russia is going to be helping them out, but Iran is helping them out. So I'm sure these these Persian Gulf companies, they're watching, their much vaunted wealth, just disappear before their eyes. And every day that goes by, they lose so many more, tens of millions of dollars, and their stock
More than
markets
that.
continue to crash, and their real estate markets are crashing, and they're just losing all this oil revenue. It just is and then they'll see some of these tankers going through for these different countries, coming from the Iranian Kharg Island. They may at some point just say, okay, you know what? Yeah, this was stupid. We shouldn't have let the Americans have, build bases. We're telling them out. Okay. And, we'll sign a treaty of cooperation with you, and just please let our tankers from our ports and our facilities pass through the Strait. And then I think, then Iran would say, great. And that may be what will happen. I mean, they're already starting to make noises like that. I think Qatar just made some sort of statement of neutrality and, and hope for negotiations. It may be the first step in that. They're under a huge amount of pressure. And so this is not something that, that's going to happen years down the road, but it may happen in the next couple of months. We'll see.
Yeah. Another thing that I heard, and I think it's more than just a rumor, I saw it on X, and the Chinese internet is also buzzing about it, is that Iran might be making some type of proposal saying that if countries do want their oil, we'll let them through, but it has to be settled in RMB, in a non-USD currency.
Right.
You have to abandon the petrodollar, and that would be the end of the U.S. empire, the world reserve currency. And that would be a huge move. And I think it's a very smart move,
right,
for the Iranians. And I mean, if you're these other countries, you kind of be like, yeah, why? I mean, why am I having to use the dollar all the time? They're constantly just printing off the money and devaluing the currency that I'm forced to use. So yeah, let's switch to something else.
Yeah, no, I've heard something similar. Right, it's only or at least non-U.S. dollar transactions.
Right.
Oil that is purchased with any currency other than the U.S. dollar. Yeah, you can go. Oh, yeah, or maybe I should put it another way. If it's U.S. dollar linked, you're not going through.
We're blowing it up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and again, the Yemeni, the Houthis have said that they're going to come into the fight. They're still keeping their powder dry, but probably not for much longer. And interestingly, it's the USS Gerald R. Ford is still in the Red Sea. It's stopped there. I'm not sure where exactly, so I don't know what's going on. Maybe they're a little bit worried about passing I forget the name of the strait, where between Yemen and North Africa there. But they may be afraid that the Yemenis are going to decide to enter the war the moment that the carrier passes through that strait or something. But yeah, again, they haven't even come into this. There are more cards to play on the Iranian side.
Right. Yeah. And I think if they do make that move, I can see countries willingly abandon the dollar. I think many countries have already been making that move. That's kind of what BRICS is. And I think Russia kind of showed to the world that, hey, you don't need the United States. Look at the current economic state of the Western countries and see how it can compare to Russia. Russia is doing better. And actually, Russia's, we've done so much to help Russia really through here, giving them their sovereignty and independence back, essentially, with all these sanctions, make them rediscover their strength. But yeah. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Something about them. Completely lost it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you say something, Dad. I don't remember.
Okay, well, there was something I wanted to comment on. We haven't been talking about the Russian war. There haven't been dramatic new developments. It's more of the same. Both the air war continues and the war on the ground, and there continue to be incremental gains on the part of the Russians. Again, they're incremental, but they're significant, and they're still on course. This is traditionally the slow time of year. I think this was the slowest time of the year for the Russians in 2025. So they're not, we're not seeing the continued acceleration. Maybe it's slowed down a bit, but that's not surprising. It's the Rasputitsa. It's the mud season. But that will end in a few weeks. And then again, there's always this talk, which you hear every year around this time, about a major new offensive, and maybe there will be, maybe there won't. It's just I never know with the Russians. I just don't know, so I'm not going to predict. But there have been, I think we do need to take note of some attacks that the Ukrainians have carried out on civilians. There was that one storm shadow that was launched into Bryansk, and the Russians have actually protested against both to the French and to the British about that, because they believe, I think it may have been fired by a Mirage aircraft. So there was both British and French involvement in this. And there were a number of civilians killed. And then just a few days ago, there was a terrible attack on a hospital in the Donetsk region by the Ukrainians. 4 drones. So, one drone, you could always, maybe this went off course. If it's an FPV, it's hard to believe. They see what, but it was 4 drones, one after another, hit this hospital and killed 8 medical personnel. Killed 8 medical personnel and injured another 8 or 9. And it's, that's horrifying. That's clearly deliberate. That's the thing. This is sort of like the thing that this happens. It doesn't happen anywhere on the scale that it happens in Gaza. And I don't think it's like whole of Ukrainian society is behind this. Clearly they're not. But there is this element in Ukraine that's very, very powerful. The ultranationalists, the Banderites that we've talked about, and they just kill Russians. It's not, there's no purpose to this, right? Again, it's just, but except the only purpose is to kill Russians. You must get some sort of pleasure out of that. I'm sorry to say that, but it just seems true, because this is not like an isolated incident. This is a particularly bad incident, but these sort of attacks on the civilians happen almost every day. And they've been going on for years and years, even preceding the launch of the SMO. Yeah, most definitely preceding the launch of the SMO. So just to take note of that, this is something that goes on. This happens. And there's never any protest, of course, or any concern among Western leaders about this.
Yeah, there's just it's just so shameful being part of the West. We act with no honor and no regard for civilian life, just human life in general. We act like it's a video game. You see these videos that the White House posts out, all these playing the Wii and then explosion or bowling, hole in one, school blows up, whatever. It's disgusting how we've just been so okay with just killing civilians and nobody, and we just say, oh, war is hell, that's war. That's well, he shouldn't have done that. Whatever it was, that's what they get for being Muslim or whatever it is. I don't know. Yeah, it's just the rationalization has just been, there is no rationalization. And so I'm disgusted in people that are able to just say that, like, that just, war is hell or whatever this is, just saying that this is just clearly wrong. We blew up a school full of little girls. We need to own that.
Yeah.
It's, no, I don't know how these people could sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, you have to say, at least in this case, the U.S. media hasn't, and will never bring up the 8 medics that were killed in the Donetsk hospital. They'll never bring it up. But they have been bringing this up, and I've seen several reporters questioning Trump about it. And he always gives these ridiculous, evasive replies, or, most recently, I don't know anything about that. He obviously knows, but he just doesn't have the moral character to say, okay, we made a mistake. And we express condolences. He could have at least done that, but yeah, he hasn't. I was just going back to Russia very briefly. Again, I talked about this incident in the hospital. Now, just around the same time, just a couple of days ago, the Russians launched a massive air attack. That involved dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones, of ground drones. There was not, the Ukrainians did not report one civilian casualty. That shows really how careful they are. Occasionally there are, and each one is a tragedy. But it's just when you think about the many thousands of missiles and, tens of thousands of drones that they sent in these attacks, how few they've been, it just shows that first of all, these weapons are very precise, and second, the Russians are very, very careful. They are not striking in spite of all this nonsense about the Russians going after civilians. It's just not true. they do go after, what they see as dual use, and it is dual use infrastructure, like the energy infrastructure, which of course does make life hard for the Ukrainians, but it also may be part of a shaping operation. Maybe they really will be a major advance, and they've got it to the point again where they can just shut the whole thing down very quickly, and maybe that's the plan. We'll see.
Yeah, I was hoping that the United States Army would behave a little bit better. That they would be a bit more careful with their targeting, just like we're talking about with Russia on its targeting. But we just seem to have gone one straight down the Israeli path. It really is the IDFization of it. I mean, we see this. What do you know? The total civilian death count in Iran now is it's over 1,000. But we
Yeah, it's
just
over. I saw a few days ago that it was over 1,300. And again, a lot
right.
of that is in northern Tehran. And it's strange, including, it almost seems, and I actually I wouldn't be surprised if it is true, but it does seem that the Israelis are in fact targeting even opposition leaders. Because we've seen them do that among Palestinians. They actually will take out charismatic opposition leaders, let's say secular opposition to Hamas or whatever. Because they don't want this. They want to simply weaken the country. It's not that they're really after regime change. They don't want there to be a regime at all. That's it. They want chaos. They want civil war. They just want death and destruction. So, there was one missile, I believe an Israeli missile, that hit a cafe that was known as a hangout for kind of dissidents, opponents of the government. And then there was a very well-known, opposition leader who was killed by a strike just a few days ago too, a woman.
So it seems like Israel's just working contrary to U.S. interests right here directly. The U.S. wants to probably put some of these opposition leaders in power. That's the goal. And Israel's just killing them and just working. It's just so insane that we are still somehow saying that Israel's our ally in any sense of the word. It's just, I can't believe it. At least people are, I think the vast majority, we are getting close to a super majority now, I think, of people in the United States that just know what Israel is now. And they see it as just this evil parasitic entity. And I'm grateful for that. That's all I can say. And that I just can't wait to be free from Israel. I just hope it doesn't go nuclear. That's all.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Yeah. Again, it's not completely clear that we're going to make it through this year of 2026. At least without some mushroom clouds. But let's hope that we do. And if we do, maybe we will, see, the pillars that we've been talking that hold up the U.S. empire begin not to just to crack as they, as we see happening already, but to actually fall.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll end on that, I guess, semi-positive note.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks a bunch, Dad.
Okay.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.